Test, test, test. I'll be speaking from about this level. I'll probably be speaking a little bit louder, but this is about, I guess we'll have to see how well it comes through this other microphone, but this is how I'll be speaking. Is that loud enough? Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. If you would mind, if you want to take a seat, please take a seat. And as you're doing that, let me remind everybody to silence your cell phones. Unless when it rings, you want me to get it up here and we'll just have a conversation with whoever's on the other end. So good afternoon. I'm Dave Hutchison, and I'm Candace's uncle, so Dylan's great uncle. And I have the honor to lead this life celebration today as we remember Dylan and his legacy. On behalf of the family, I'd just like to thank all of you that have joined us here, and for those that are joining us online with the live stream. Your presence here really makes a huge difference to the family and shows your love and support for them, for Dylan, the impact that Dylan has made. So again, thank you for being here and in joining us in this life celebration. For those of you that are farmers and those of us that grew up on a farm, I think we can uniquely identify with Dylan's story. In the early 1900s, my grandfather moved his young family from Tulsa, Oklahoma, up to Hamer, Idaho, to homestead some ground up there. And he and several other farmers got together, found water, dug canals with a team in Fresno, and started turning the sagebrush and the sand into productive farms. When my father was 15, my grandfather died of acute appendicitis. So at 15, my father took over running the farm out in Hamer. And every year, he wanted to get more and more of the farm under cultivation. And so every fall, every spring, we'd work to help him bring more under cultivation. And it was his dream, it was his goal to see everything under cultivation. And I've often said I wouldn't trade my experience growing up on the farm for anything. It was great life lessons. But I do have to qualify that. I'd trade milking those darn milk cows any day of the week. If you've had milk cows, you understand what I'm talking about. I was never so happy when they stopped hauling grade C dairy, and we had to, when I was a sophomore in high school, we no longer could milk cows. Hallelujah. But I would like to just again focus on Dylan and the celebration. And I think of my dad when he started like that, and I think of Dylan, how young, and you'll see that as Justin talks with his remarks, and as I get an opportunity to kind of lead us through the celebration, you'll be able to really experience Dylan and what it was like for him growing up. So again, thank you for being here. Dylan does remind me of my dad, their work ethic, their love for farming, and we're going to touch on that, their hope and optimism for tomorrow and what that would bring. So let me open us in prayer. Father, I just thank you for this beautiful day that you have given us. I do thank you for each and every one that is here, that have come to support the family and to show their support and love for Dylan and who he was and the legacy that he brought. So Father, thank you for that. Thank you for this beautiful day to be in this field and to celebrate Dylan and his life. So we just pray that you just be with us now. In Jesus' name, amen. So we're going to pretty much follow the program as outlined, and following Justin's reflection on some of Dylan's life, we're going to have a video celebration, and recognize it may not be the easiest to see, but keep in mind we're going to have it running after the life celebration too, and then during lunch. And I strongly encourage you to get a chance to go over and really look at those. There's been a couple of different programs that have put together. The one that we'll see here is a bit shortened version. The one that was playing, if you had a chance to look at that beforehand, thanks Alicia Beverly for putting that together. And then we've got one that's like 450 pictures of Dylan and his life growing up that we'll be playing. So I just encourage you to look at that and we touch on that. So I also want to thank Jazz from Missing in America for doing all the programs and putting in that time and energy for the program. So as I said, we're going to have Justin come up and some remarks, then we'll do the video celebration, and then I'll come back up and kind of go through Dylan's life story.
Well, this little field's never looked so big as it does today. I want to thank everybody for coming. This has been a long time coming to today, and I want to thank everybody for all their support, their kind words, the prayers, everything that we've been going through these last few years. You guys have really helped us more than probably even know. Seeing the posts with the sunflowers and everything, really just the little things has really meant the world to us. I want to thank Candace for thinking about the sunflowers and helping us share Dylan through the sunflower thing. I wasn't too fond of the sunflowers at first, but then as it got going, I see how nice it was. Thank you, Candace. I kind of wish I would have taken some speech classes in school or something to know what the hell I'm doing here, but for the last 2 years or so, I've been sitting in the shop with Dylan's first pickup sitting right there, and I've been trying to organize my thoughts of what I was going to say today, and I knew this day would come for a long time. And you might think that I had a lot of time to prepare, but the more time I spent doing this, the more stories and thoughts that came. So I've got some stories and a few things, but there's so many more. I just picked a couple. When I sit in the shop and I think about Dylan, I thought about all the times how I missed him when he was a 4-year-old, and I would have different times when I'd miss him at different periods of his life, rather than just a 19-year-old or a 18-year-old or whatever it was. So I watch Facebook a lot and look at the reels, and I came across a reel from, I don't even know what show it's from, but it's Al Bundy says it in Al Bundy from Married with Children. I don't know what show it's on where he says this reel, but I read this reel and it really hit home, and I think a lot of us can relate to when our kids move out of the house, or when our like us with Dylan, and if any of you have had a son or daughter die, I think a lot of people can relate to this. And I'm just going to read it real quick. You fall in love with a baby with the cutest little fat folds, then bang, they're gone. But it's okay, because in its place is a toddler with the greatest laugh on earth. And then one day the toddler is gone, and it's a little kid that asks the most interesting questions you've ever heard. And it keeps going on like that. But you never get the chance to miss any of them, because there is always a new kid to take the place of the old until they grow up. And in a moment, all those kids you fell in love with walk out the door at the same time. And I do feel like a lot of us can relate to that with our kids moving out. It hit me hard when I saw that, and I wanted to share it. Like Candace has said, a lot of times Dylan loved to come in the room, and he always had a story to tell. Didn't matter what it was, whether it was the farm or something. He always had a story to tell. So I'm going to tell a few stories that I remember of Dylan, and there's so many I could go on and on, but when we first knew we were going to have Dylan, he was supposed to be a girl, and I don't know that we got real ready for it, but we were expecting a girl. And my whole life, since I was a young kid, always thought how neat it would be to have a boy as my first son to farm and do a few things. And then he was born, and it surprised the hell out of all of us. I was pretty excited, but then later on I kind of got a little bit sad missing the girl we were supposed to have. So he came into the world, surprised the heck out of us there. And then, I don't know if he was 3 or 4, he was out changing water with my dad, and he looked down into a culvert, and there was a skunk down in the culvert, and it sprayed him. And my dad, and I might get the story wrong because I didn't hang out at the house a lot because it stunk pretty good. So Candace had a lot of that. But she talked about shaving his head. He shaved his head, trying to get everything off of it, and all he could say was that a black and white kitty had sprayed him or peed on him or something. And then when he was about 5 years old, he watched me out sorting cattle and a few things, and he'd snuck back to the farm when I think we were at my parents' house, and he'd moved all the calves into a little sorting pocket. And I think he was 5, he might have been 4, and the calves got bunched in the corner, and they decided to turn, and they ran over him, and he came back to the house all muddy and cow manure on him, and you could tell he cried a little bit, but he was pretty excited that he'd done that. And then probably when he was 6 years old, I had a John Deere 7800, and Dylan was in probably the second land right over there, and a neighbor farmer, Doug Feldy, drove by, and he said as he drove by, Dylan saw him coming, and he could see that Dylan jumped up out of the seat and waved just as much as he could to get all the attention he could from Doug because he was so proud of himself. Driving the tractor, no, man. And he was always proud, and he loved farming out in here. Then when he was 12, Candace and I had bought a 410 22 combo shotgun, and we'd put the 410 barrel on and sent Dylan out in the backyard. And we probably should have put the 22 barrel on, but he pulled the trigger and the gun smacked him in the face, and he was not too happy with us with that. And some of these stories aren't ones that I was there personally. I have a friend named Justin Palmer. We call him Rosie. He went out to cut wood with him one night and stayed the night, and they were cutting wood. And I remember Rosie coming back and telling me what a hard worker he was. And I remember the feeling of pride I had that my son could go out and work and stay the night at a young age. And I don't know what age he was. He was probably younger than 12 then. But I was always proud of the way he worked. Another story, Dan Sinner is a neighbor down there. We farm over by him, and he had a bunch of small bales, and he needed a little bit of help hauling the hay. And Dylan and Colton got my dad had them go help him. And I remember hearing the story of Dan saying how he was sitting in his yard and all he could hear was 2 boys laughing and having a great time. Dylan always had fun doing work. I mean, and that was a good story for me to hear about him and Colton. Colton, I'm sure you remember that day. This Ford over here was Dylan's first pickup, I think he was 14 years old. The neighbors had an estate sale, and we found out that it was for sale, and Dylan, he was ecstatic that he could buy an old pickup. If you can't tell, Dylan liked old things. This old truck, that old tractor, and he had the money in the account, and we went and got it out, and he went over and paid cash, and he was so proud of that pickup. And so we've got a lot of family heirlooms now. Older truck. This truck, I don't know if you can see now, but it says D Rounds 102. He went and hauled sugar beets with it, and at the sugar beet dumps, they have to have a number so they can know what truck is hauling what in. And he wrote on that truck with the Sharpie. And when we got it back, it was starting to fade away, and we had a guy that pinstripes all my trucks come and pinstripe that so that we can keep his handwriting. So that's his original writing on that truck. And the old tractor was my grandpa's. Dylan would take that to the Rigby Early Iron Festival when he was really young, and he met a lot of people that were good for him in his life through that, and the people were really excited to see his joy of old machinery and work ethic. And then the final conversation I had with Dylan was, we were coming through Salt Lake going to Las Vegas. I was going with my daughter, and he was just ecstatic talking to me about a versatile tractor he'd driven, and he was telling me all about the cab, and he was in and out of service, and I was getting kind of frustrated talking about a versatile tractor and talking in and out of service. But my last conversation with Dylan was excitement. He was excited about the tractor. He was excited about starting to plant his crop. And those are just some of the stories I had of Dylan that I wanted to share. There's so many more. And then I asked the kids if they would write some stories. Brooklyn, Colton, if you guys could come up here and read them. No, the other night they were teasing me at the shop because I was so nervous. And I said, well, you guys are going to get up and read your stories, and you should have seen the looks on their faces. They just changed like, and even up till now, I've been kind of teasing Brooklyn a little bit about it. I'm going to read Brooklyn's. We had to go to Ryrie to fill an old grain truck up that Dylan had bought. On the way home, Dylan made Colton ride with him. As JD and Brooklyn were following, and Stubby Bob was the little short pickup that the kids had named, the truck started to smoke. Dylan and Colton jumped out and said, "Go get a bucket of water. I think it's going to start on fire." So in Stubby Bob, we drove to a random guy's shop, stole a bucket. He wasn't around, and we filled it with water out of a puddle. By the time we got back, we had already spilled more than half of the water, and the truck wasn't smoking anymore. So Colton and Dylan got back in and started to drive. As they were turning onto County Line, a tire was a little flat on it, and the truck was so full it looked like it was about to tip over. They stopped to look at the tire and decided it was fine to drive back. So Dylan made Colton get back in with him, and Colton was so scared he was begging just to ride in Stubby Bob. But Dylan insisted he rode with him. And she left out the crying part, but when Colton was younger, just before he'd start crying, he'd get his lip out like this, and I just think of that when I see that. Just a few more miles down the road, the truck broke down. We ran to the farm to get a gas can because we thought it was out of gas. And that didn't work, so we ran back, got a chain, and decided just to pull the truck home with Stubby Bob. We made it most of the way there until the chain unhooked from the truck at Climb, right over there. Just as we were about to turn down the lane, at my great-grandpa's, we got it all hooked up again and made it to the farm, finally. It probably took what should have been a 30-minute trip into an all-day trip. And then Colton's story. Now, I had to edit this a little bit But you can probably figure out what maybe I was said. I told him to just say how he meant it, but I just felt I better edit it. One of my favorite memories with my brother Dylan was the first time I ever rode in this old Freightliner Classic of his. His John Deere 4960 just got finished getting fixed. He was headed to get a trailer to pick up his tractor to take it back to Lucien. He asked me if I wanted to come get the trailer with him. I remember going to get the truck, and there was no step on the passenger side. I climbed my way in and said, "Did one of your girlfriends break the step off?" And before he said a word, he punched me in the gut and knocked the wind out of me. We then started down the road, and right before we got to the trailer, an airline broke off one of the air cans. He pulled the truck over and said, "Get out and help me cage this brake and pinch off the airline to the can." I said, "I can't, the step is broken." So he then threw the vice grips at me, and I hopped out to help him. We got the brake caged and the airline pinched off quickly. We finally made it to the trailer to pick up the 4960. I got it loaded. We got it loaded up and chained down for its journey to Lucien. I remember thinking what a shitty old truck this is. I know Dylan would be pretty happy to see that we use his truck daily. I've learned to appreciate this old rig and take a lot of pride in it. If he knew that I get to haul pretty much anything you can put behind his rig, he would think it's pretty badass. I kind of wanted to talk to my kids a little bit, Colton and Brooklyn, and just about keeping Dylan's memory alive. When I was a young, I don't even know how old my grandpa Yerke was when he died, and I don't really remember him at all, other than my grandma and my aunts. And my mom always kept his memory alive, and it felt as if I knew him, even though I really didn't know him. Whether it be the root beer popsicles he used to like or the popcorn, and you guys can remember Dylan, and I want you to always remember the things about Dylan and pass those stories on to your kids. Brooklyn, Maisley. No matter what, we'll keep moving forward, and we'll keep Dylan in our hearts. And we'll see memories of him all over, wherever we are. And thanks to Candace, those sunflowers helped a little bit. And we just need to acknowledge him and know that those memories are Dylan, and that we're seeing him and we're remembering him. This whole experience has been a long, long experience for everybody, and it could leave us really angry and sad. But we can't choose to let this define us or our family or Dylan. This won't be our only hard time that we ever have to deal with, I'm sure. We can't let the hard times defeat us, or it'll make our lives miserable, and we can't do that for Dylan. And God's plan is not always our plan, and we've had to find that out these last 2 years. This definitely wasn't our plan. Definitely wasn't Dylan's plan. But I think Brooklyn and Colton, if we always remember that God has a bigger plan, it helps us navigate through. the hard times. And again, I just want to thank everybody again. I see so many familiar faces. I see faces I'm not too familiar with. And I know there are strangers and people all around the world that have been pulling for us, and we sure feel it. And I just want to thank you again. And with that, I'm going to let Dave come back up. Thank you, guys. Candace? Oh, this isn't hooked to that. All right. While she's doing that, I just thought of one more thing. We've got a tow strap in this tractor just in case the pickup stops or just in case the tractor doesn't, and we got jumper cables. But if it does, just know Dylan's around if something happens, because he would absolutely love it. And you better have all that stuff ready, Colton, right? Are you getting it? Thank you.
again, I just encourage you after, during lunch to watch all those pictures of Dylan and the memories that were made. Justin, thank you so much. Not sure I really need to cover anything. I mean, what an awesome tribute to Dylan and his life and, what he contributed. And as Justin said, just being able to keep his legacy alive. But we got a few things I want to share. So let me start where we always start, in the beginning. And on the first day of August in 2002, God looked down on his earth and his people and said, I need a caretaker of my land and creatures and someone to be a loving son, brother, grandson, nephew, cousin, and friend. So God gave us Dylan Jamie Rounds. God said, I need someone to love the land in Idaho and Utah as much as I do. I need someone willing to get up before sunrise, feed the animals, work all day at school or on the land, eat supper, and work until after dark. So God gave us Dylan. I need somebody with a tenacity to wrestle a steer or a sheep, but gentle enough to tend to an injured bird or animal. Someone with a sense of humor and a heart big enough to demonstrate love to friends and family. Somebody to watch over the livestock, put up the hay, change the water, fix the tractor, but willing to drop everything to help a friend or a neighbor. So God gave us Dylan. God said, I need somebody that is a dreamer and a builder and a visionary with a strong work ethic. Somebody who loves my creation and knows that it takes determination and drive to turn a barren piece of land into a productive farm. I need someone who sees the potential in old tractors, farm implements, snow machines, and people. I want a person who is inquisitive and capable of learning by observation. So God gave us Dylan. God wanted somebody that knew at a young age the calling for his life. Someone not afraid to chart his own course and work without ceasing. Someone with the stamina and energy to plow fields, swath and bale hay, thresh grain, irrigate crops, build fence, and brand cattle, yet someone that would take time to enjoy the solitude and beauty of God's creation, especially the mammoth sunflowers that Dylan loves so much. So God gave us Dylan. It had to be somebody special who would love and conserve the land and not cut corners. Somebody to seed and weed and feed and lead and succeed and reap and to make a difference in the world and the life of those that he touched. So God gave us Dylan for 19 years to watch him grow into an amazing man. He gave us precious time to see and experience life through the eyes of Dylan. God gave us moments and days and months and years to be inspired and to love and be loved by a special human. So God gave us Dylan. I want to touch just for a moment on the depth of Dylan's life. You know, Ralph Waldo Emerson said, it's not the length of life, but depth of life. And I believe a life that is lived in depth is a very rich life, and one that is likely lived wide open and full throttle. And for those of you that were with Dylan each and every day, I expect Dylan lived wide open and full throttle wherever he went. And you'll hear some of those stories. Dylan was an old soul that didn't care about what others thought. He just did his own thing. To quote who I think is the world's foremost philosopher, Dr. Seuss, he said, sometimes we will never know the value of a moment until it becomes a memory. Ultimately, we don't remember days or weeks or months that we spend with people. It's the moments that make those precious memories. I expect that a lot of you have so many experiences and precious moments and rich memories with Dylan, just like what Justin shared and Colton and Brooklyn. And that makes us part of his life story and he part of ours. It's like Justin talked about, keeping it alive. So after the life celebration, and again, as we go to the graveside, you're all invited to come back here and share in a luncheon. And one of the things we want to do after the luncheon is to provide an opportunity for those that may have some stories that they want to share of Dylan to be able to do that. So I ask you to be thinking about some stories, your favorite story of Dylan.
and be able to share that, because what that's going to do is help us just collectively to understand exactly who Dylan was. Justin, like he said, he had many things to cover. I'm just trying to cover a few things to kind of give his life sketch, but I'm sure many of you have very deep and can provide dimension to Dylan's life. So please plan on doing that. So let me just go over Dylan's life sketch, his story. And it really is hard to tell such a rich story, even for somebody who was 19 years old in such a short period of time. But I want to cover just a few highlights of Dylan's life. And again, in addition to what Justin had reflected. And as mentioned, Dylan was born August 1st, 2002, the first of the three children to Justin Rounds and Countess Cooley. And Dylan was followed by two wonderful siblings, Brooklyn, born in October of 2004, and Colton in April of 2006. And as Justin said, and I love this story, right up till the day before Dylan was born, they thought he was a girl. And so I understand, Justin, Candace, you had a lot of pink stuff, right? Probably that's about all they had. And in typical Dylan fashion, just like Justin said, Dylan came into the world his own way. Little did you guys know that really all you probably needed was a pair of work boots and Levi's and a flannel shirt. And that's all that you really would have needed. So as a toddler, Dylan would sit in the big bay window in the morning after he ate his oatmeal, waiting for his grandpa or his dad to pick him up and go farming. And from the time that Dylan was able to walk, just like Justin said, all he really wanted to do was farm, especially with his dad and grandpa. Dylan started driving a tractor before he could ride a bike. And for those of you that maybe grew up in a city with sidewalks and blacktops, that may kind of sound funny to you. But for those of us that grew up on a farm, it's a whole lot easier to drive a tractor in the dirt than it is a bicycle. And plus, it's a whole lot more fun. Dylan loves farming so much that when he was 4, he had his own farm or his garden. What a great babysitter that was. He would never go further than the end of the hose could reach because he was irrigating his crops, and that was his focus. And you probably weren't able to see it completely, but there's a picture of Dylan where he'd been out irrigating his farm, covered from head to toe in mud. And that's what happens when you irrigate. You usually get wet. So Dylan raised several animals, including dogs, calves, pigs, and chickens. Candace told me that one time Dylan decided he'd buy an incubator and hatch some chicks. But he read up on how to do it, and while waiting to get enough eggs, he hid them in the crawl space under the house. Snuck in there and would continue to add eggs and hide eggs. Now, again, I never raised chickens. We had several things, but we never raised chickens, and I thought to myself, I don't know. I mean, how long can you store eggs? And, how do you really tend to them before you start incubating them? So I Googled it and tried to see what you needed to do to be able to incubate eggs. And this is what it says. Number 1, store them at a temperature between 53 and 60 degrees. Yep, Dylan got that by storing them under the house. Store them in a damp place with plenty of moisture so that they won't dry out. Yep, he did that. Store the eggs on their side or with large end up as the surface, and if storing them more than 10 days, go in and turn them once in a while. So obviously Dylan did that as he was sneaking under the house, and so he would do that. And then it says when you're ready to incubate the eggs, bring them up to temperature slowly so that you don't give them a thermal shock. And I understand out of the approximately 70 eggs that Dylan had collected, about 50 of them hatched. So he had a bunch of chicks running around. And that really demonstrates, at a fairly young age that he was inquisitive, that he wanted to learn, that he'd research himself, and he really demonstrated that ability to want to grow things and just move forward. So Dylan grew up here in Yukon and also in the Hazelton areas. He attended elementary in Hazelton and Twin Falls, and I think it was the 8th grade that he came back to Rigby because of the strong FFA and auto tech program and to work with his dad and grandfather. Dylan had many friends, but his closest were J.D., Hayden, and Tanner, is my understanding, and I think they're all here today. maybe you guys after lunch, you might share some stories with Dylan that you have. Because I can only imagine the escapades that you guys probably got into. Now, there is a qualifier, because I remember being a teenager growing up on a farm and the trouble that we got into. So they've got to be appropriate for a mixed crowd. You might have to kind of tone them down like Justin did for Colton's story. But, you know, don't shock your parents or Dylan's parents too much. I know that my parents never, ever knew most of the stuff that we did growing up. Dylan's favorite subjects were agriculture and mechanics, but he also liked history. And I understand that when he was about 10, he read Where the Red Fern Grows and decided he wanted his old red-bone hound dog, just like old Dan and little Ann from Where the Red Fern Grows. And so one was found in Oakland, California, and he and his mom flew from Salt Lake to San Francisco, rented a car, picked up the dog, and started to drive back home. And since they were traveling over the Donner's Pass, Dylan started to do some research about Donner's Pass and the Donner Party of 1846. And I understand that as they were driving back over the pass, Dylan said, you know, I don't understand how the Donner Party could have got stranded. Why didn't they just follow this road? And as Candace was laughing, he thought about it a minute and said, oh, never mind. But every time he would go back and forth, he did a lot of research. And you can see from just the farm equipment and things that Dylan loved history. So Dylan loved working on the farm but wanted to grow his crops, his own crops to sell. So Dylan, Brooklyn, and Colton had a field that they could use to grow these crops. And it's the very field that you're sitting in today. It was their great-grandfathers, and they grew produce, so they wanted to make some money. Dylan wanted to grow sweet corn. So for years they grew things to sell under the county line overpass not far from here. And I expect several of you probably remember buying produce from the Cute Rounds kids. They also grew and sold pumpkins, squash, peas, onions, and anything else that people would eat and buy. While working on the farm in his tween years, Dylan was planting, swathing, baling, harvesting, and working cattle. How a kid that age could have so much drive and passion to work without ceasing is amazing. He could outwork most adults. Justin had shared one of his favorite memories that he didn't share here, but I understand one time they finished building a fence on the farm. And they had finished building the fence, and they wanted to paint it. And Dylan was really excited to be able to paint the fence. So they went and rented a paint gun, and Dylan went to work painting the fence. And it was about 100 degrees that day. It was really hot. And when Dylan got done, he was hot, he was tired, he was sweaty, and of course covered in paint, as you might imagine. But Dylan was so excited, Justin shares, and this is one of the things with his work ethic and how excited he was, that he convinced Justin, hey, we need to paint these gates red. And so let's go get, while we've still got the paint gun rented, let's go get some red paint. So they went and got some red paint, and they painted the gates. Well, he wasn't out of red paint, so he painted the tops of the grain bins. And I guess he painted the old gas pump. And Justin, if you probably had your own spray gun, probably everything on the farm would have been painted, I expect. Once Dylan got his driver's license, he started to scout the surrounding countryside, looking at what our other farmers were doing, and was always thinking about how he could do it bigger and better. And he was also looking for old equipment and a good buy, because he would purchase these, just as Justin was talking about, and a lot of times fix them up, trade them, sell them. He was always looking to get bigger and better pieces of equipment. He mostly bought the antique equipment because those were probably what he could buy, but he always was trading up and doing things and then saving some for his own collection. I understand one time he bought an old corn planter that was at auction for about $50, which is probably scrap price. But Dylan saw the significance, and this is his love of history. He saw the significance enough that he kept it and fixed it up. And again, I encourage you, when you look at the video tribute and you see Dylan with those old pieces of equipment and you see the smile and the pride on his face and what he accomplished, it's pretty amazing. So Dylan, about this time, began to work for other farmers, and he was always impressive. They would comment about his skills as an equipment operator and how hard he would work. And I guess it was about 2016 for the spud harvest that he was able to join a harvest crew and start, because he could be on workman's compensation. Of course, for those of us that have done potato harvest, you know, you generally start picking clods or something like that, but not Dylan. He was able to drive a crossover, and a crossover basically picks up the potatoes from a few rows, depending on the size of the crossover, dumps them over where the digger will come so that they can dig a lot more potatoes at that point in time. And they knew that Dylan could run this piece of equipment, and he didn't disappoint. And one of the things, if you've ever ran a crossover, to me it was one of the most best pieces of equipment to run in the spud harvest, because you just run along and just keep ahead of the combine, but you always saw all the spuds that you were dumping into the other row. And I guess every day Dylan would bring home what he thought was the biggest potato until the next day, and he found a bigger one, and he'd bring that home too. So at 17, Dylan began working with the local hay company and channeled his energy into that endeavor. He worked from 16 to 20 hours a day and found his groove. As time allowed, Dylan was still working on the family farm because he wanted to help wherever he could. Dylan had acquired a decent amount of equipment and started custom farming and purchased a semi-truck, as Justin talked about, and was hauling the sugar beets, potatoes, and straw for farmers throughout eastern and southern Idaho. Dylan worked so hard because he had a goal, and that goal was to ultimately own and run his own farm. That was a dream he had focused on for years, and his goal was realized when he and his grandfather were able to start the farm in Lucin. And it took a couple years to get all the soil prepped and everything ready to go, get the pivot moved out there, get everything set up, and to have everything ready. And while he was still doing that, at the same time, he was also working here on the farm, custom farming for ranchers in Nevada, in Arco, here in Idaho, and was just continuing to work wherever he could. What a remarkable young man. And as we know, at the end of May of 2022, Dylan finished planting his first crop in Lucin. And that's triticale, which I think is this plant right here. One of these plants up there. Nope, not triticale. Anyway, so triticale is a hybrid grain of wheat and rye, and one that I suspect that Dylan spent a lot of time researching to figure out what was the best crop to plant, what was the best thing to do in Lucin to be able to make a farm. It seemed a perfect choice. And so that was the beginning. Dylan had big plans that included turning much of the barren Lucin countryside into a thriving farm, and he was truly a dreamer, a builder, and a visionary, and he's an inspiration. So I've just got a couple of closing thoughts I want to share. There's two things I want to share. One, as if we talk about Dylan's story, is the first to his immediate family and their contribution to Dylan's life. To Candace and Justin. It's obvious when I examine Dylan's life that you provided Dylan the environment and personal example to work hard, think for himself, and have an enthusiasm and optimism for life. To not be afraid to take chances, to dream big, and to keep going no matter what. Those are just a few of the traits that you contributed to Dylan's life and who he was. I think the greatest gift that we as parents can provide to our kids is love and a self-confidence. And you provided so much of both. To the grandparents, Larry, Karen, Terry, and Denise, I know how proud you are of Dylan and who he was. What a gift from God to be able to enjoy your grandkids and to demonstrate unconditional love and support. To be able to help them learn life lessons, to be a mentor, and to shape their future. You provided a listening ear without passing judgment, imparted empathy when necessary, and I suspect you probably even provided some grandparent wisdom, whether Dylan wanted it or not. Your actions and love made an impact. Well done. Brooklyn and Colton, you are the epitome of younger siblings. I know you have many fond memories of farming, growing a garden, selling produce, skiing, going to the hot pools, vacationing, and just daily life. The love and respect you hold for your older brother is awesome. I appreciate sharing the stories that you did through Justin. And as Justin said, thanks for keeping the memory of Dylan alive. So the last thing I just want to touch on is a question for the rest of us. And it's really just kind of following on to what Justin had talked about. Since we're all part of Dylan's story in one way or another, whether we're mentioned just as a daily sentence, so we're with him, we were with him every day, or whether it was just during the week, or maybe during the summer, or maybe for some of us, just an occasional chapter in his life. What do we do? How do we respond to his impact, and what do we do? Part of my growing up was attending the Mud Lake Community Baptist Church, and I learned a lot of foundational biblical truths that stayed with me, and it gave me life direction and hope for my time both here on earth and after. And as I considered Dylan's life and his story, I was reminded of a Bible verse from Proverbs 13:12 that says, "Hope deferred makes the heart sick, but a desire fulfilled is a tree of life." And Dylan's goal was to start his own farm, and that desire was fulfilled. However, as we know that Justin had lots of other dreams and goals, and I know that so many of you couldn't wait and were excited to see what kind of amazing things that Dylan could accomplish. So how do we respond from a broken heart that's maybe sick from a deferred hope? Just to follow on what Justin said, first we got to grieve. And what a tragedy to lose someone so young that enriched countless lives, someone that had a vision and a focus for the future. Grieving is important. Then after our grief, we can move from hurt to hope, and then from hope to triumph by lifting and helping others up. I don't think there's any better example of that, of turning tragedy into triumph, than what is on the DylanRealmsLegacy.org webpage. Most of you have probably seen it, but I just want to read that. And I think it really makes a statement. Part of it, Dylan's legacy will strive to make a meaningful difference in the lives of others facing the uncertainty of a missing family member. Establishing Dylan's legacy is our way of honoring Dylan and Dylan's memory and ensuring that other families facing similar circumstances receive the assistance and compassion that they deserve. So what now? How do we turn from hope and then to giving and serving? And last thing, while I was preparing for this, there were a couple of examples from, that's fitting, dog chasing the chicken, sick 'em on a chicken. Anyway, as I was focusing on Dylan's life, there were a couple of things that really came to mind just looking at Dylan's character. And so I'm going to just touch on these two last things as I close. One is Dylan appreciated and cultivated relationships. As I talk to people and get to hear their Dylan stories, it was always about cultivating relationships. And we know, those of you that are farmers, that you have to work 365 days a year regardless of the weather. Everything must be done, and regardless of how you feel, each morning you got to get up and do the work. And in the same way, it takes each of us a commitment and energy to grow and maintain relationships. We must get up and do the work, and our relationships must be cultivated. If we don't put forth the time and energy, like a field left unattended, weeds will grow and overrun, or insects will destroy. Relationships were important to Dylan. If you look at the back of your program, that what's on the back of that program was on Dylan's phone. And it was one of the things that Dylan, many pictures, many things, many videos that Dylan had on his phone, but that was one of the things, and it's so fitting. But I like the last part of that says, when it comes to friends, it is quality over quantity. So at the end of the day, our relationships are the best way to make a lasting impact on others. And the second thing that we've talked about and that you can see is Dylan had hope. I don't know the life expectancy of a chicken, but I suppose that wasn't one of them that Dylan had hatched. Looks like the life expectancy of that one's not very long. Anyway, let's have hope and optimism. And that's another thing, obviously, from farming. Situations from a farmer's perspective are out of control. Whether we get a late frost that impacts the crops, we get rain when hay's down, or whether we have bugs, whatever it is, we know that there's years that bring plenty of disappointment. But a good farmer has hope in the next crop. And Dylan had hope and continued to work on what he did. Let me just cover this last page. So Dylan had lots of hope and optimism. And I think one of the reasons for his hope was really the people that have impacted his life and the fact that he loved farming. But there was also something that Brooklyn had shared on her Facebook, and I asked her if it was okay to share what she had put on Facebook, and she said she thought it was fitting. So while I understand while reading her Bible last February, Brooklyn was wondering about some things, and she called Justin, and she asked Justin, she said, "Dad, do you think that Dylan read his Bible?" And Justin said, "Well, I'm not sure, but I know an individual, a friend of Dylan's, that had mentioned that Dylan had sent some Bible verses to him and asked him to pray for him and his farm down in Lucin." So Brooklyn reached out to this friend and asked him if he remembered the Bible verses that Dylan had shared. And this is one of the ones that Dylan had shared. It's Jeremiah 17, 7 through 8. And it said, "The person who trusts in the Lord, whose confidence indeed is the Lord, is blessed. He will be like a tree planted by water. It sends its roots and out towards the stream. It doesn't fear when heat comes, and its foliage remains green. It will not worry in a year of drought or cease producing fruit." In the post, Brooklyn stated, "No matter what the world brings to us or what we have to face, we should always look towards Jesus and not the troubles of the world." And Brooklyn went on to say, Dylan had started his walk with Jesus. He had welcomed him into his life. So I believe that's one of the primary examples. And there's many more that we can experience from Dylan's life. But we got to have trust and confidence, just like Justin said, that we can make a difference and we can keep Dylan's legacy alive. So God saw the life of Dylan Jamie Rounds, and behold, it was very good. He found a hard worker and a caretaker of the land. He found someone that was planted next to a stream of life, and someone that had hope for tomorrow, and a man that would sacrifice his time and energy to leave this world and his people better off than he found them. And behold, Dylan's life was very good. He closes with prayer. Father, we thank you that you have given us Dylan. Father, for the life that he led, for the relationships that he built, for his hope and optimism that leaves us with a legacy. And Father, I just pray that you just continue to be with each and every one of us here and those that may be joining from wherever with a live stream, that we can just keep that legacy alive, Father, and that we can just make a difference in this world, just to be able to turn tragedies into triumph and continue to hold up that legacy. So just ask that you go with us and be with us in Christ's name. Amen. And let me just cover a couple of things as far as the graveside service. First off, if you don't want to go or can't for whatever reason of the graveside service, but want to stay here, please do. And again, please join us for lunch after the service. And we'll go to the graveside service, and then when we're done, we'll come back here. And so I'll ask at this point in time for the pallbearers if you would come forward, and then I'll turn it over to Eckersville.